how does it make sense in the era of precision medicine that we could study somebody's data, somebody's biosamples, which is like the highest fidelity data that we have, right? Think about how close to the truth the biosample is as a form of data compared to like what's in the electronic medical record. How is it that we could learn something from it and not be able to benefit the person with it? Because supposedly a policy that was supposed to be making research more ethical, more efficient. That's not very efficient. It's not very ethical.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. And don't forget that CME credit is available when you listen with us. Just look for CMify in the show notes to learn how. My guest today is an obstetrician gynecologist with faculty appointments at 2 major medical universities. She's also the developer of a new technology called decentralized biobanking. So let's hear my conversation with Dr. Marielle Gross. I'm really looking forward to my conversation today with Dr. Marielle Gross, who is coming to us from up in western Pennsylvania, I believe. We didn't talk about this, Marielle. Is that where you are?
Right now, I'm in Maryland.
Oh, are you really? So you're on the move.
I split my time between the Pittsburgh area and the Baltimore area.
I see, and we've caught you on the eastern end. Well, I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. This is really some interesting work that you're doing, but as is always the case on this show, we want to talk about the entirety of your career trajectory, beginning at the beginning. So let's talk about the beginning. Just from looking at your CV, I'm not exactly sure where you did your growing up and what your early family life was like. So why don't you fill us in on that?
Yeah, great. And thank you so much, Randy, for having me on. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. I grew up in New York and then was transplanted to Florida. I ended up graduating high school a little on the early side and went back to New York City for college and graduate school. At the time of starting college, which was at Columbia, I knew that I wanted to go into medicine. Now, I had no family in medicine, so this was the way that you kind of have that internal sense of knowing that without having any knowledge of what I found in medical school later is really a culture as much as it is a profession.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that, but I did know that I wanted to help people with science. And that's where I really, started from. And I also started from the perspective that my formative education would be an opportunity to study things that I thought would come to bear on medicine, but that I otherwise might not have a chance to learn about. And that really focused on philosophy, religion, ethics. And so as it turns out, I did 3 degrees in ethics before going to medical school.
Yeah, and I'm really fascinated in that story, and I'm glad that you brought it up because it really stood out to me as I went through your CV. A lot of the people that I interview are heavily invested in the sciences before they ever even make an application to medical school. And you did something that we actually are encouraged to do, and that is to get a broader-based education. So tell us some more about how you came to that decision and how you made a reality of it.
Well, the funny thing is now, of course, it seems funny, but at the time, I guess it was a premonition. I had this sense that, instead of being, even though I wanted to help people with science, that I felt I needed to be grounded in the humanities.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a parent that was coming to and fro the hospital. Really nothing like that. I just had this sense that it seemed like if the substance of your work was human beings and human flesh or the human body, that after a while it could become like no different than, cutting a roast beef. And there was something about that was, I guess, led me to some existential distress that I wanted to guard myself against by doing extra training in ethics, humanities, and religion to really have that, not become inured of the human nature of, and the sanctity really of the flesh that is the substance on which we work, especially in now in a surgical discipline.
That's a lot of insight for a person
17-year-old
of those years. And have you got any
16 at that
idea
time, yeah.
how you came to be in that mindset?
I can't remember how I came to that, but I can remember that I started off wanting to be a scientist, and I had the opportunity to work in a skeletal biology lab at Shriners Hospital as a high school student and designing my own experiments. It was really fantastic. And at the same time had been volunteering with a program which some of your listeners may have heard of. It's called Best Buddies. It essentially pairs students with various disabilities for the purpose of wide-ranging activities, everything from Special Olympics to academic, other kinds of social activities. And the person I had been paired with for many years was a patient with spina bifida and had a terrible fear of hospitals, so bad that we had to leave a movie because there was a hospital scene. And so I kind of avoided telling her that I was working in this hospital in the lab over the summer. She kept going after me. What are you doing this summer? I know you're not doing nothing. What are you doing? What are you doing? She wouldn't let it go. And finally I was like, I'm working in this hospital, and tried to sort of quickly say it and move on to the next thing. And she said, Shriners. Oh, I love Shriners. And she just lit up. And it was such a remarkable departure from what I had observed in her reaction as obviously somebody who as a child had extensive experience in the healthcare system. And so it really gave me this lens on what was going on at Shriners as being something that was special, and that we were doing basic science, but we were caring for people in a holistic and person-centered manner. And that was, I think, related to my insight about needing to make sure I was grounded and centered in the human purpose of what it means to practice medicine. And once I took my first bioethics class, I was 17 years old. I was just kind of off, to the races after that. It was just, I changed my majors. I was, going to be a biology major. I said, forget that. I'm going to philosophy and moral philosophy. And I did a second degree in Jewish ethics, and then went on to do a degree in bioethics at NYU before going to medical school. So my entire, medical career was through the lens of ethics.
What a great idea. And I'm wondering, what was the reaction that you got from the people who interviewed you when you were making your medical school application?
I think it was early on in that time when people started saying, oh, maybe we should get somebody besides, biology and chemistry majors in here. And so I think that there was a good amount of interest. I mean, it's great because you can have so many great, conversations. My graduate thesis had been about the sugar sweetened beverage tax that was proposed in New York City, and, about the moral panic about obesity that was going on at that time. And my undergraduate thesis had been about the Octomom, both of which were really, I think, provocative cases to have an interview discussion that was a little bit more interesting than maybe what most people had talked about. So I think it was good from that. It's good fodder for a medical student interview.
So you didn't really get any pushback?
I got pushback in my residency interviews. And I
Really?
remember distinctly. Oh, yeah, I remember distinctly. And it's funny because, as it turns out, having a trained ethicist around can kind of be a pain in the neck, as is, as it has magnified exponentially in recent years.
Really
I have
thought
to tell
about
you.
that.
Yeah, it sounds great. It sounds great. We want some ethics. Who doesn't want ethics? Bring it on. And then suddenly you're like, what do you mean what we're not doing is perfectly ethical? You mean we're working our asses off? We're trying to take good care of these patients, and you're saying our entire system is, patriarchal and exploitative of the patients. What do what do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't what we hired you for. So I remember the residency interview particularly was being challenged about all of the work you've done. And I did throughout medical school. I taught undergraduate course on bioethics, and my research, was about public health and ethics in that regard. And I continued to do writing and things of that nature. And she said, in residency, you're going to confront some really serious ethical dilemmas. I mean, how do you think you're going to be able to function? If you're thinking about it, and how are you going to practice as a resident if you're worried about all of the, the many ethical dilemmas that sort of make up every step of the way?
And what was your response to that?
I think my response to that was two-part. I think one is that I'm here to learn, and coming in as a resident. I mean, do residents fully understand the ethics of medicine? I don't think so. And so I said, my first and foremost is learning, and I know this is learning through practice and service. And so my research interests aside, that's what has to be first and foremost. I know that there's a lot that I don't know that's relevant to even understanding the ethical issues in medicine. And I'm here this was at my first choice and what ended up becoming the place where I did my training at Johns Hopkins. And I'm here to learn from that. And the other thing is I said, don't worry, I'll take detailed notes. and I'm not going to forget, and it's going to inform the work that I will do in the future, which indeed turned out to be true. And so that was my response to that.
Well, there are so many things that I would consider to have been unpredictable about you. You have such an interest in the humanistic side of healthcare delivery, and yet you chose to do your specialty training in a relatively surgical specialty, OBGYN. Can you give us some insight about how that decision came about?
It's also, I think, a pretty good one because I was, again, no background, no family, no knowledge of medicine. I chose to do my surgery rotation first. I thought, I'm not going to do it, so I might as well get that under my belt. And then OBGYN I chose to do last in my fourth year because I thought, if there's anything I'll definitely not do is the surgical subspecialties. I'm very even self-typed, right? The way they Myers-Briggs you and make you think that, a surgeon is this way and a medicine, an internist looks like that. They kind of teach you to adopt that cage of a mindset. And so I, to an extent I did. And I thought I would do medicine with the idea I would do preventive medicine and oncology and infectious disease and kind of combine all these things. It was really throughout, go through the whole process. Third year, I had my applications ready, my letters ready for medicine and preventive medicine residencies. And I had my fourth year, and it was the OBGYN clerkship. And I remember, because of all the work I had done in HPV vaccine research and the Octomom case and all of the ethical issues that I had studied a lot of reproductive ethics and justice throughout my bioethics and philosophy training. And so I just knew a lot about what was going on, or had a depth of understanding and interest in it. And there was all these things that were coming along that, these long-term relationships. And the one thing I really appreciated, I remember distinctly about surgery, in particular colorectal surgery, was the way that you have to be to create a therapeutic bond with somebody, to make them so comfortable with you that within a few moments of meeting you, that you could do the most invasive possible examination that somebody under any other circumstance would never let occur. Mm-hmm. And you had to have such a manner about you. And I was really respected that about the colorectal surgeons. And I found that aspect was, of course, true also in gynecologic context. And really, it was the first, sort of all of that aside, it was the first birth I went to that opened my eyes to thinking, wow. First of all I really did was it was a fifth baby. It was like ran into the room and, managed to not drop the baby as flies past you, and just handed it to this person. I was really there in I thought a supportive capacity. And yet it was such a positive experience. And at that point I was really well acquainted with the hardness and the darkness that is the practice of medicine when you're constantly exposed to people who are suffering and worse off than you are. And you see so much heaviness. And I thought, this was really this remarkable thing, that to have such a moment of lightness, not that it always is, of course, but that there's this sort of inherent moment of lightness that was a constant counterpoint in the OBGYN field. And that was really when I started to think, well, what about, prevention? I mean, a lot of this is preventive medicine. Well, what about justice and science and medicine? And well, the thing that really struck me was that since I had had all of my rotations already at that point, I thought it was remarkable how unevidence-based women's health was compared to every other field. I mean, even psychiatry, medicine, so there's really multiple high quality randomized controlled trials and seemingly good data to say what we should do. And you go to women's health and it was like expert opinion was as good as you could do in almost every circumstance. And because of my interest in health systems, which was really what had been driving my research from a vaccine perspective, but, driving my research in medical school, this idea that there's this intersectional injustice in that women's health is not evidence-based, and it sort of compounds on top of every other disparity that this population was experiencing. And yet the opportunity in the era of digital medicine, because I was onboarded to medicine at the time that the hospital I was at was onboarded to Epic. So I was like, wow, in a year or two, we could close these gaps.
Well,
and that's in retrospect.
I'm really fascinated by what you're saying. And I don't know if I overlooked it because I simply had limited experience in women's medicine, but can you talk a little bit more about the absence of objective data in that field? I'm really a little shocked that that's the case, and I can't wait to hear what you have to tell us.
Well, we know that basically until the 80s, women were essentially excluded from almost all clinical trials. It's just considered just a slight hormonally awkward version of their male counterparts. And then finally, when studies started in the 80s, started in the US anyway, started including women, the disparity remained huge because anybody of reproductive age, anybody who was pregnant, anybody who's breastfeeding, and to this day, we know, even though the law has changed, doesn't necessarily change the practice, that anybody with reproductive capacity continues to be risked out of much research that they might potentially themselves benefit from. And even the interesting case, right? One of the things that really drove a lot of this and solidified it culturally is the thalidomide case.
Yeah.
But really, that case could have also been used to show that we need more research, not we need less research. But the response from really from a risk mitigation standpoint was, well, we better exclude anybody from research at any time because, in part, the background of torts and who can be held responsible for anything that goes wrong.
And if you will, I truly hate to keep interrupting you, but
no, go ahead, please.
Something that just stuns me from time to time is the volume of things that the current population has had no experience with, and I'm willing to bet that perhaps 2/3, maybe more, of the people who hear this podcast have never heard of thalidomide. So if you wouldn't mind, give us about a 3 or 4 minute summary of what that tragedy was all about and how it happened.
Wow, good pop quiz. Well, the bottom line for thalidomide is that it was a drug that was given to women in pregnancy for pregnancy-related symptoms without adequate safety data demonstrating
primarily nausea. It was
nausea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was given for nausea. And it ended up causing pretty severe birth defects. And so
horrific.
As a result, really bad limb malformations, just very things that the images that they created were pretty visceral and people really responded to them, I think, appropriately in a way. But the response was that not that we should have done more research on thalidomide and for using nausea, for treatment of nausea in pregnancy. The response was we can't give pregnant people anything. And so there had been basically
right.
From that point forward, there had been something like only 50 or 52 FDA approved drugs for pregnant people. And we were, giving people these essentially giving them really old school. I'm blanking on what's the old school blood pressure medication that the people are still giving? Methyl-dopa, Aldamet.
Okay, sure.
So we're we're giving people like Aldamet and yet none of the new stuff was tested in pregnant, never tested in pregnant people. We didn't really, and just people would stop. And then people, of course, now fast forward, people taking medications that are seriously enabling medications, whether they have autoimmune disease, asthma, sickle cell disease, you name it, just you're on these medications that are life sustaining. and they become pregnant, and everybody freaks out, whether it's the patient or the providers or a combination, and drops these medications. Of course, it accelerates in many cases the harm. The long and the short of it was I was really optimistic about this potential to close the gaps in evidence and therefore in equity for women's health by a rigorous application of information sciences and digital technology. And I decided to go into OBGYN because essentially of structural injustice in the evidence for health.
Are you a doctor struggling to provide the best care for your patients while dealing with financial and caregiving matters out of the scope of your practice? Do you find yourself scrambling to keep up with the latest resources and wish there was an easier way? Then this virtual caregiver conference resource will save you time, money, and sanity by giving you all the resources and information your patients need in one place. This conference helps you and your patients enlist the best strategies around healthcare resources and the best financial steps for your patients while navigating caregiving situations. You don't have to go home feeling frustrated and helpless because you couldn't connect your patients with the best services. Find out more at jeanniedoherty.com or click in the link in the show's notes. You don't want to miss this caregiver resource.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. That is really fascinating. And we could probably carry this on for hours and hours, but before we lose the audience, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about something that you've been not just instrumental. You've basically been the power behind the notion of decentralized biobanking. So I'm going to give you the floor, and you can tell us what that means and why we should be interested.
Yeah, so if you, as a patient, agree to donate your tissues, your blood, your biosamples for research today, the form that you sign says you'll never find out, we'll take your name off of it. But that means that patients are disconnected from all of the potential benefits of research on their own body parts. Those benefits could be, in this day and age, something that's directly relevant to their health. It could be something that gives meaning to, your end of life. Your reason for donating was because you might die, but it gives you hope to know that other people might benefit from the harm of your experience. And it means that you'll never find out if your samples were so valuable that they plus a small number of other people's samples were responsible for entirely new pharmaceuticals or other kinds of really commercial value that could come from the research. I had gotten really into this problem with this whole studying de-identification and the theory of how does it make sense in the era of precision medicine that we could study somebody's data, somebody's biosamples, which is like the highest fidelity data that we have, right? Think about how close to the truth the biosample is as a form of data compared to like what's in the electronic medical record. It's like the realest of the real data. How is it that we could learn something from it and not be able to benefit the person with it? Because supposedly a policy that was supposed to be making research more ethical, more efficient. That's not very efficient. It's not very ethical. And when you carry it out at the level of, the full scale of the health system and the entire biomedical science industrial complex, it was sort of this perfect manifestation of structural injustice. And the thing that happened that I guess is not really talking about centralized biobank, but to continue with your theme of the story of where it came from, was I was presenting about this as a new faculty member at Pitt. And a gentleman in the audience who turned out to be the director of precision medicine at UPMC in Pitt said, this matters because we find BRCA genes in de-identified breast tissue samples, and we fret about the fact that this is the kind of thing that somebody would want to know, and yet they're saying nothing. And these samples are coming not from random de-identified strangers, they're coming from the hospital across the street. And the idea that this lab could be and then they grow them, they make new copies. They're doing this like next generation tissue culture, which is called organoids, or they're making a living model of the tissue by growing it in the lab, keeping it alive, making it immortalized, and can grow copies of it. And they're testing on any one patient's tumor. They could test 100 different therapies and combinations to see what actually would work. And it's this very promising future precision medicine approach of, creating a living model from the person's own disease to guide our therapeutic decision making. Well, today, when that occurs, by and large, it occurs it's not in a clinical trial. It's in the setting of translational, what's called preclinical translational research. And the samples are de-identified, and there's no mechanism to inform the person of the fact that the drug that they might be about to start is not going to work, or what might work, or that they have a mutation that not only is relevant to what drugs they qualify for, but that would change how you would manage their entire family. And so I was like totally blown away by this example that on the level of our health system was systemically negligent, because of course we could predict that studying patients' samples at least sometimes will yield information that could be relevant to their health. It's at least going to happen sometimes. And the fact that we wouldn't create pathways and technologies to enable that rescue to occur really meant that research was sort of knowingly exploiting patients at their most vulnerable moment, when they're about to go to surgery, sign this form, and do you agree? And okay, can we take it for anything extra for research? And people agree because they trusted their physicians. And so the system was not only exploiting the patients, it was exploiting the patient's trust in the physician and the goodwill and what patients say. They assume, this is where I, brought up the whole idea of, as a surgeon, right? You put somebody under anesthesia and do something to them that in other circumstances would be assault because they believe it's for their benefit. And of course, they want other people to benefit if possible. But the idea that if something could benefit them, that their physician will never be informed, that they will never be informed, that doesn't jive. And so that was why when I learned about that particular very non-theoretical, very real example of provable harm as a result of the current research practice, I thought we have to start thinking about this in a new way. And we have to build something because this is solvable with an app. And so to actually answer your question, decentralized biobanking takes it as this fundamental principle that patients absolutely have a right to share in the benefits from research on their own biosamples, whether that be the knowledge of what's done so that we respect them for their contribution to science, the clinical benefits that they have every right to expect based on the fiduciary context in which the samples were obtained, in the line of duty to protect and advance their own health interests, and the commercial gains that could occur as a result of their, these essentially assets that become the property of other people. As they become a mere, quite literally in the ethics terms, they become a mere means in advancing the science instead of an end in themselves. That's, in a society where especially where medical care is not paid for or for granted, that was especially wrong. And so decentralized biobanking is both a new conceptual framework where patients are centered and connected to their biosamples throughout the life cycle, from exploratory research through the potential translation of those benefits, through potential commercial uses across different healthcare centers and different fiduciaries, all while protecting their privacy and empowered by next generation technologies that make this possible by making it feasible and compliant with regulatory requirements of de-identification, and sustainable and scalable with automation and various features that we come to expect from our technologies in every other context. That's really what decentralized biobanking is about, and that's why we created the company to facilitate the development of that technology, which we call DBI.
And so how does a potential patient take advantage of DBI today?
Well, right now we're in pilot phase. So the work that we're doing now, where we're doing different pilots, is to inform the product that we believe we should make available to all patients and all scientists, so that this is a universal right that can be facilitated with the new technology. So for patients today, it's not available. But I can tell you that even in our very first pilot, 2 months, over 1,000 patients in the breast cancer biobank in Pittsburgh signed up to participate. So we kind of proved that it's something that patients are pretty excited about.
If I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like this is not something that's going to be like a couple of decades down the road. What's your guess on when it's going to be ready for prime time?
Prime time, depending on which aspect of it you mean. So we have a pretty elaborate vision of how this actually gets implemented, because don't forget, I should say, one other thing about DBI is we believe the patients are the owners of their samples, not just that they should be able to know. And so this is like new legal frameworks, right? New concepts. And in any event, there's a lot of people who are interested in preventing that from coming to pass.
Really?
Well, you might find this surprising, but there's people who benefit from the patient being out of the picture. Those people who, whether they don't want to hear from the patient because they don't want to be bothered, whether they don't want to be forced to share profits, whether they don't want to be liable for having not shared life-saving information, you name it. What I've heard in an interesting way put by somebody was, I don't need backseat drivers in my research. Like, they don't want the patients saying, oh, what about this or what about that with the science? They're like, it's our science. We want to do it. And we want to be left alone.
Wow.
You name it. But you think about it. I mean, every major drug, every major biotechnology that comes out is using human samples. It has to.
Absolutely.
But the number needed to treat, so to speak, to develop a new drug is not that many. Even if you took something through phase 0 to phase 4 trials, it's maximum a couple thousand. And then the earlier the phase and the higher the risk for the patient, the lower the numbers. So it's like not like an absurd number of people that are going into any one thing. It's really a handful. And there's really unmet reparations basically on one side of it. Anyway, that kind of digresses. But the first step to us is transparency. And by making transparent the research that's going on, giving people, kind of opening people's eyes to the fact that what's happening right now, people don't have that general expectation that you could learn. They're just told, don't worry about it. Sign this form. It's fine, by their doctor, who they assume has their best interest at heart. They're not led to think, what if it could be helpful for my health? What if it's, my samples are really valuable and people are, commercializing them. And so we think the first step is to show people the way forward with a technology that allows them to track their samples, just like you would you could track a package, you could track a pizza, but you can't track your tumor. Mm-hmm. Well, now you could track your tumor with an app. And that app, which we consider a digital bridge between the bench and the bedside, we believe can be widely available in 3 years.
Well, that's pretty good. I'm impressed that you could actually give me a number that precise.
Well, because we're building it and we're piloting our second generation now. We did many prototypes, of course. We're doing our second generation pilot now. And it's pretty unprecedented because we have scientists on one side and patients on the other. And they're people that would, they meet in the flesh, but never have a way to communicate. And that's going to be changed now. And it's essentially a technology that everybody's very familiar with, social media technology, just de-identified.
You bet.
And deeply personal. And that technology, we believe, can be, if we have the right, if like everything lines up, what have you, that could be ready in the next 3 years to be widely available. The technologies and the the deeper, the ownership questions, those are going to take longer for us to solve. But I think that transparency is the is the first step anyway, because you can't claim ownership of something you don't know that exists. But once you know a sample exists, let me tell you, and it's displayed to you, we call it the bio wallet, displayed in a bio wallet, and you see, oh, my breast tissue samples, oh, my blood. Oh, it was taken. It shows you all the data that's there. It was taken the day I had surgery. It was taken. Oh, that was when I was admitted to the hospital for this or that, the other. Legally, the owner is still the hospital or the university, but certainly not culturally, which is part of the challenge that we're dealing with now, as you can imagine.
Well, it sounds to me like this is probably, maybe certainly the first time that the patient has had an opportunity to be involved so early in the development of this kind of research. And that's bound to make a huge difference.
Thank you.
If you put that information in the hands of enough people, it's bound to make quite a bit of noise. And there's a threshold beyond which the noise can't be ignored.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're pretty close. So kudos to you for taking it this far and for being as enthusiastic about it as you clearly are. I think there's no way you can possibly not win on this.
Well, we're on the right side of history.
Well, that's a good place to be. And I appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me about all this. Marielle, it really has been fascinating. It's been enlightening, and I have enjoyed every moment of it. But that said, what I'd like to do at this point is do what we came here to do, and that's get me out of your way. So, audience, I'm going to take a pause and close my mic, and Dr. Marielle Gross is going to share her personal prescriptions for success.
Yeah, you know what the hardest thing about it is?
What's
Is the having to admit that on some level I'm successful.
Well, this is a good time for you to overcome that. It really is, because you have done and continue to do things, Marielle, that are of immense value to the people that you serve. So I'm going to give you permission to luxuriate in that reality. So carry on.
Thank you. My inspiration comes from a couple of different places. I would say, first and foremost, it's patience. One patient whose experience clearly informs my work is Henrietta Lacks, and her story, which I believe is not just her story, is the story of how people in medicine are treated when it's less than what you would want it to be, has been incredibly instructive. And it's both the combination of what we're doing that's exactly the same to everybody today as we did with Henrietta Lacks, as well as the opportunity that we have now to do things differently that really inspires me. And every time I've felt with the hardness and the heaviness of the work that I do, or even in medical school and residency, whenever I felt like just kind of lost, I've always had success in framing and focusing on the people that I was helping, or the people I was trying to help, and focusing on the impact that the work that we're doing is having on the patients that we have been able to help so far with what we're doing. And it's easy to say it's only that one person, or it's only that small bit of benefit, or maybe it never changes outcomes, but it makes people feel, it helps people cope with their death, or it helps people in whatever way it could be positive in contribution, whether to the science or to their personal experience. And it's that focus on the positive and the aspects of, closing gaps and promoting healing that has been the source of inspiration for me. I liked your question of, what are 3 things you would tell yourself from 10 years ago? And it's the same thing that actually patients and everybody that I really talk to deeply about the work I'm doing now is really keep going. And I'd probably say that one thing 3 times. And if you just keep going, like what that means is have confidence. If you really connect with something, you really know something, you can't look externally for validation and for proof. You have to have, at some level, be willing to, first of all, be confident enough to know that if you're wrong, it's so what? You could be wrong, but you still have to sort of act that you trust that you're right. And for me, that anyway is, a large degree of cheerfully ignoring when people tell me that what I'm trying to do is not possible. And in many ways, as much as patients are inspiration, when you need an extra kick, let the haters be your inspiration. It's funny when they were describing the population of the listeners, I thought, wow, this is a group of people that I feel like I could really relate to in the grind of medicine, and how dark the practice of medicine has become in this sort of post-industrial era where we're all like human capital instead of, small business owners whose sort of ethical, fiduciary, and sort of scientific integrity are all sort of wound up together and practiced in a way that delivers value on the level of individual relationships. And in many ways, I feel like that's been increasingly taken from physicians. And so I get it's like this total grind. It's not that we're burned out because we're working so hard, the hours are so bad. It's just because the systems are so fundamentally wrong, and the gap between what we could be doing to help people and what we are doing to help people is wider than ever. And if we just kind of sit back and sort of collect our paychecks and do our, minimum necessary to sort of meet that clinical criteria or whatever our RVU targets or whatever they are, you sort of become complicit. And I believe that we should follow our hearts and follow the reason why you're in medicine in the first place, which sometimes leads you away from medicine, but that keeps you grounded and connected in the reasons why you were there in the first place. And I have this theory about clinicians as being sort of inherently wise beyond our years. And we all have this lived experience that not only our own lived experience, but our lived experience incorporates so many people's lives at an intimate level that most people outside of our profession would never have. We've seen things from a perspective, at least an adjacent perspective, to thousands of people that most people would only ever see for 2 or 3 or their, very handful of close people. So we have this really rich lived life experience and this connection to humanity. And it's an opportunity to take that insight and do something with it that's positive. We have to be flexible about what that means and how that looks. And that might evolve over time. And in fact, if it doesn't, that it probably means we're like asleep at the wheel. One other thing I would tell myself 10 years ago, which maybe to end on a humorous note, is, you really look good and you should just relax and smile and go with it and just not forget to be playful about the whole thing. And don't take yourself so seriously. That's my prescription.
Well, Dr. Marielle Gross, you've given us a lot of wisdom there, and I'm not at all surprised. It's a great story you have, and I'm really grateful that you came and shared it with us today. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to share with our audience how they can find you and more about you, whether it be email addresses or Facebook handles or websites or whatever you have. Would you have anything for us?
I think the easiest way to get in touch with me you could find me on LinkedIn. My name is Marielle Gross, MD. My other initials, MD, MBE, Masters in Bioethics. And my email is Marielle, MARIELLE @dbi.co, which is DE-BI.co. And I'm pretty easy to find. Reach out to me. We're very much interested in connecting with people who see our vision and who want to be part of the solution, who have use cases, who want to know what happened to their own tumors, who are doing research that they wish that they were able to tell patients about. We could use any and all forms of support. So I very much welcome anybody in your listenership to reach out and get to know our team and the work that we're doing. We think it's exciting. It's fun. The exciting thing that we have on the nearest term is our next pilot launch, which will be coming up probably, knock on wood, by the time this has aired. So if you'd like to get an update on where we're at today and some other juicy details that we didn't get to share here, I'd love for you to reach out to us.
Dr. Marielle Gross, thank you so much for being with us today on Prescriptions for Success. This has been a real pleasure. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed the show, you can help us reach more listeners by leaving a rating and a review, especially on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if your app doesn't have that option, just leave us an email or a voicemail through SpeakPipe. You can also help by becoming a Patreon member. That link is in the show notes. And we hope you'll also follow our companion podcast, Life-Changing Moments with Dr. Dale Waxman. Special thanks to our producer, Craig Clausen, our promotions manager, Mariana Rodabaugh, and to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music. And remember, be sure to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.